possibilities for arguments which will support the claims we've already made. So in that sense, the relativists are right. Okay, so this is one of the things I think is so attractive about this proposal, is that it explains some of the key intuitions of both sides. Okay. So the idea is, in a sense, that our ancestors hit upon this kind of conversational game in which there's this kind of value, this kind of winning, which involves the idea that we seek agreement, we're, as it were, awarded points by our fellows when they come to treat us as, when they come to agree with us. I wanted to give you another quote from Bacon at this point, because it's a quote in which what Bacon is talking about, in effect, is the peculiar kind of pleasure that comes from, as it were, the feeling that you've achieved the truth. And if I'm right, this is a kind of pleasure which, in a sense, stems from the fact that all the time, unconsciously, we're playing this particular game. Bacon is actually paraphrasing Lucretius here. And the point he's trying to make is this is a kind of supreme pleasure. Bacon says it's a pleasure to stand upon the shore and see ships tossed upon the sea. A pleasure to stand in the window of a castle and see a battle and the adventures thereof below. But no pleasure is comparable to standing upon the vantage ground of truth and to see the errors in the veil below. Now there's certainly an element of sort of Schadenfreude in this in Bacon's description of these pleasures. I mean, because at least the first two depend on other people's misfortune. And actually my colleague Rick Benitez pointed me to the original in Lucretius, and it's much worse there. Because the reference to the ships tossed on the shore is basically a reference to the ships being sunk in the storm. But let's update it a little bit more, get rid of some more of the Schadenfreude. What Bacon is saying, in effect, is something like, harbour views are wonderful, so is watching sport, but nothing beats knowing that you're right and the other guy is wrong. Okay, now, you don't have to share Bacon's order of preferences between these different kinds of pleasure. It doesn't matter whether truth is a supreme pleasure. What matters is that there's some kind of motivation which almost all of us share, which is the motivation which makes us think that there's some point, which gives us a kind of incentive to try to resolve disagreements. And my claim is that there's something crucial that we learn about truth when we see that it's associated with a kind of system of values we have which plays that role in our conversational lives. Okay, so I want to say that the pleasure that Bacon is describing here is a pleasure that we humans have in some sense invented for ourselves, not consciously of course, but it's an internal pleasure. It's a sort of pleasure internal to the community of human life. And a pleasure available to us because we play a particular kind of conversational game. And I said before that this explains both why it seems such a transcendent, objective, godlike achievement, but also why we don't actually have to be gods to enjoy it. And I think it's true. If you think about the role that argument, conversation, and so on plays in our lives, I think it's fair to say that it's a much more useful myth than the gods themselves. So, if you think back to Rorty's description of truth as correspondence, Rorty's comparison of the idea of truth as correspondence to a kind of a sort of obsequious quasi-religious view that there's an authority beyond ourselves, there's a sense in which I want to agree with Rorty. I want to say, look, the idea that there's this value is in a sense a myth. But once we see the job it's doing in conversation, we can see that it's a myth we should at least think twice before we get rid of. It's a myth which plays an enormously central role in the way in which we think of ourselves. Okay, a couple more quotes from Bacon to finish up then. Bacon says that men have been kept back as by a kind of enchantment from progress in the sciences, by reverence for the authority of men accounted great in philosophy. Bacon thinks this is a terrible idea. He says, it shows a feeble mind to grant so much to authors and yet deny time his rights. Who is the author of authors? Nay, rather, of all authority. Rightly is truth called the daughter of time. So he turns out that this is time rescuing his own daughter from the cave of darkness. Good, that's it.